The transmission arrived at exactly 3:17 in the morning. After 50 years of silence, the radio crackled with a voice that should not exist, requesting permission to land at an airport that had been rebuilt twice since the flight vanished. Senior air traffic controller Marcus Webb had 28 years of experience guiding aircraft through storms, emergencies, and near misses. But nothing in his career prepared him for the voice that came through frequency 121.5 that October night. The call sign matched a Douglas DC-6 that disappeared over the Atlantic Ocean in 1973 with 42 passengers and 6 crew members aboard, declared lost after 6 months of fruitless searching across 12,000 square miles of open water. Marcus worked the overnight shift at Boston Logan International Airport, a position he volunteered for because the silence helped him think. The control tower stood 18 stories above the tarmac, its windows offering a panoramic view of runways stretching into darkness like black rivers under scattered pools of sodium light. On this particular night, fog rolled in from Massachusetts Bay, thick enough to reduce visibility to less than half a mile. The radar screens glowed green in the dimmed control room, tracking 3 inbound flights and 1 departure waiting for clearance. Everything felt routine until the emergency frequency erupted with static. Before we go deeper, make sure to subscribe now. This channel exposes aviation mysteries and forbidden reports the industry tries to hide. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next investigation. The voice emerged from the static gradually, like someone speaking through water. Marcus later described it as distorted, layered with what sounded like multiple voices speaking in unison, though the words remained clear enough to understand. Boston Tower, this is Transcontinental Airways Flight 749er, requesting approach vectors for runway 22 left. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Transcontinental Airways had ceased operations in 1981 after merging with another carrier. Flight 749er had departed Philadelphia International Airport on the afternoon of October 9, 1973, bound for Boston with an estimated flight time of 1 hour and 12 minutes. The aircraft never arrived. Marcus reached for the transmit button, his hand trembling slightly. His colleague Jennifer Hayes, a controller with 15 years of experience, noticed the hesitation. She rolled her chair closer, removing one side of her headset to listen. Aircraft calling Boston Tower. Say again your call sign and current position. The response came after a pause that stretched for nearly 20 seconds, long enough that Marcus wondered if the transmission had been a fluke, perhaps a recording accidentally broadcast on the emergency frequency. Then the voice returned, clearer this time, but wrong in a way Marcus could not articulate. The tone carried no emotion, no stress, no indication that the speaker understood anything unusual was happening. The voice said, Transcontinental 749er, currently over the outer marker at 3,000 feet, requesting permission to land. We have 42 passengers, fuel is low. Jennifer grabbed Marcus by the shoulder, her fingers digging into his uniform shirt. She had pulled up the flight database on her screen, and the information confirmed what both controllers already knew. Transcontinental Flight 749er had been officially declared lost at sea on April 14, 1974, after investigators concluded the aircraft likely suffered catastrophic mechanical failure and crashed into the Atlantic approximately 80 miles east of Nantucket. No wreckage was ever recovered, no bodies found, no emergency locator beacon detected. The aircraft and everyone aboard simply ceased to exist. Marcus made the decision to treat the transmission as a genuine emergency. He cleared all other traffic from the approach path and activated the crash response protocol, alerting fire rescue teams and airport operations. His voice remained steady as he transmitted. 749er, Boston Tower, Roger. You are cleared for approach runway 22 left. Descend and maintain 2,000 feet. Be advised, visibility is 1/2 mile in fog. Can you confirm souls on board and fuel remaining? The radar screen showed nothing. No transponder return. No primary target. The sky above Boston remained empty according to every electronic system in the tower. The voice responded immediately this time, and Marcus heard something new in the background behind the pilot's words. It sounded like crying. Multiple voices crying simultaneously, a chorus of distress that made his skin crawl. The pilot said,
Boston Tower, we have 42 passengers and 6 crew. Fuel shows 20 minutes remaining. Passengers are experiencing distress. We need immediate landing clearance. Jennifer activated the backup recording system, ensuring every word was captured on multiple devices. She whispered to Marcus, "This is impossible. Check the date on that transmission." Marcus looked at his console display. October 9th. 50 years to the day since Flight 749er disappeared. Airport Operations Manager David Chen arrived in the tower 11 minutes after Marcus activated the emergency protocol.
David had spent 34 years in aviation, starting as a baggage handler and working his way through every department before assuming his current position. He entered the control room and immediately sensed the wrongness saturating the air. The other controllers had stopped working, their attention fixed on Marcus and Jennifer. David approached and placed a hand on Marcus's desk. He asked, "What do we have?" Marcus played the recorded transmissions. David listened without speaking, his expression transforming from confusion to something approaching fear. David made 3 phone calls in rapid succession. The first went to the airport director, waking her at home with information that she initially dismissed as a prank. The second call went to the Federal Aviation Administration Regional Office, where a duty officer promised to dispatch investigators immediately. The third call went to the National Transportation Safety Board, specifically to the Cold Case Aviation Division, a department that David learned existed only because of this phone call. The division apparently maintained files on unsolved disappearances and unexplained aviation phenomena, though their work remained classified under regulations that David did not fully understand. Meanwhile, Marcus continued attempting contact with the Phantom flight. He transmitted, "749er, can you confirm your aircraft type and departure airport?" The response came after another long pause, and this time Marcus detected interference in the signal, a pulsing rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat. The voice said, "Boston Tower, we are at Douglas DC-6, departed Philadelphia at 14:35 local time. Current altimeter setting, please." Marcus provided the altimeter setting, his professionalism overriding the surreal nature of the situation. Jennifer had pulled up weather data from October 9th, 1973. The conditions that day had been clear, visibility unlimited, with light winds from the northwest. Perfect flying weather. No reason for the aircraft to vanish. The crying in the background of the transmissions grew louder. Marcus could now distinguish individual voices, women and men both, calling out words he could not quite decipher. He asked, "749er, do you require medical assistance upon landing?" The pilot responded, "Negative, Boston Tower. Passengers are frightened but uninjured. We encountered something over the ocean. We lost time." Those 3 words hung in the air of the control tower like smoke. We lost time. Jennifer pulled up her chair directly beside Marcus, and together they stared at the radar screen that showed absolutely nothing where an aircraft should be appearing. David Chen stood behind them, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in urgent whispers to someone at the FAA. "They are sending a team, but it will take 90 minutes minimum. We need to keep this transmission active and document everything." He paused, then added, "Nobody discusses this outside this room until we understand what is happening." The other controllers nodded, but Marcus noticed how they had all moved their chairs slightly farther from his station, as if proximity to the phenomenon might somehow contaminate them. Marcus transmitted again, "749er, say your current altitude and distance from the airport." No response. He repeated the call. Still nothing. The emergency frequency returned to its normal static hiss. Jennifer checked the recording equipment, confirming all systems remained operational. They waited. 3 minutes passed. 5 minutes. At the 8-minute mark, Marcus was preparing to declare the contact lost when the voice erupted from the speakers with such volume that Jennifer jumped, knocking her coffee cup to the floor. The liquid spread across the tiles like dark blood. The voice was screaming now, multiple voices layered over each other, creating a horrible harmony of panic. The words tumbled out. "Boston Tower, we are descending. We cannot stop descending. Engines not responding. Altitude passing through 1,000 feet. We see lights. We see water. We see—" The transmission cut off mid-sentence, replaced by a sound that Marcus would later describe to investigators as similar to metal being torn apart, a shrieking groan that lasted exactly 4 seconds before silence reclaimed the frequency. Every person in the control tower heard it. David Chen grabbed the edge of Marcus's desk to steady himself. Jennifer had gone completely pale, her hands shaking as she reached for the radio controls. 749er, Boston Tower. Do you read? Nothing. He tried again. Nothing. He switched to the guard frequency, broadcasting on every channel. Any aircraft receiving Boston Tower, do you have contact with Transcontinental Flight 749er? 3 different pilots responded, but none had seen or heard anything unusual. Airport fire rescue teams had positioned themselves along runway 22 left, their vehicles lined up with lights flashing red and white against the fog. David ordered them to stand down but remain in position. He then made the decision that would define the rest of his career. He ordered a full emergency sweep of the airport perimeter and the waters of Massachusetts Bay immediately adjacent to the runways. The search began at 4:03 in the morning, utilizing airport security vehicles, fireboats from the Massachusetts Port Authority, and a Coast Guard helicopter that arrived 20 minutes after the request. They found nothing. No aircraft, no wreckage, no debris. The fog lifted as dawn approached, revealing empty water and vacant runways. The search continued for 6 hours before David finally called it off, though he kept the incident documentation sealed and ordered all personnel involved to submit written reports directly to him. The FAA investigators arrived at 11:30 that morning, 2 men in dark suits who spoke briefly with Marcus and Jennifer before confiscating all recordings and radar data from the night shift. Marcus Webb did not sleep that day. He returned home to his apartment in Quincy and sat at his kitchen table, replaying the transmissions in his mind. The voice had sounded wrong from the beginning, but he could not articulate exactly how. It possessed a quality of distance that had nothing to do with radio signal strength, as if the speaker existed somewhere far removed from normal space. The crying in the background haunted him most. Those passengers had been afraid, truly terrified, and their fear had transmitted across 50 years and whatever impossible distance separated them from the world Marcus knew. Jennifer Hayes requested a transfer to day shift operations 3 weeks after the incident. She never spoke about that night again, even when approached by investigators from various agencies who continued to show interest in the case over the following months. David Chen retired earlier than planned, citing health concerns, though those who knew him suspected the real reason involved the questions that the transmission had left unanswered. What happened to Flight 749er in 1973? Where had it been for 50 years? And most disturbing, was it still out there somewhere, trapped in whatever pocket of existence had swallowed it? The official investigation concluded 6 months later with a report that Marcus obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request. The document ran to 47 pages, but the conclusion was brief and unsatisfying. Investigators could not explain the transmissions. They could not trace their origin. Audio analysis revealed anomalies that suggested the recordings had been somehow altered, though no evidence of deliberate hoaxing was found. The voice pattern matched no known pilot from the original flight manifest, but that proved nothing since voice analysis technology from 1973 was primitive compared to modern standards. However, one detail in the report caught Marcus's attention and kept him awake for many nights afterward. A research team from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology had analyzed the background sounds in the transmission, specifically the crying voices. Using audio enhancement techniques, they isolated 17 distinct individuals, 9 women and 8 men. They then attempted to match these voice patterns against the passenger manifest from the original Flight 749er. They found 12 possible matches. 12 passengers whose family members, after listening to the enhanced recordings, insisted they recognized their lost loved ones. Marcus started researching other cases. He discovered that Flight 749er was not unique.
Aviation history contained dozens of similar incidents scattered across decades, most of them buried in classified files or dismissed as hoaxes. In 1947, a British South American Airways flight called Stardust disappeared in the Andes Mountains, its final transmission consisting of a single word that made no sense: Stendek. In 2009, Air France Flight 447 vanished over the Atlantic, and though wreckage was eventually recovered, the black box data contained gaps that investigators could never explain. In 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 disappeared entirely, becoming the most expensive aviation search in history despite finding almost nothing. But those flights at least left evidence: physical wreckage, confirmed crash sites, bodies recovered and identified. Flight 749er left nothing except a voice in the dark and the testimony of 3 air traffic controllers whose careers were fundamentally altered by what they heard. Marcus began to wonder if perhaps that was the point. Perhaps some disappearances were meant to remain mysteries, gaps in the fabric of reality where the normal rules suspended themselves and allowed the impossible to briefly intrude. He found himself thinking about the pilot of Flight 749er, a man named Robert Hammond who had accumulated over 9,000 hours of flight time and maintained a perfect safety record. Hammond had a wife and 2 daughters who had been waiting for him at Boston Logan that October evening in 1973. They waited for 6 hours before airline representatives finally approached them with news that the flight was overdue and contact had been lost. Hammond's wife died in 1998. His daughters, now in their 60s, still refused to speak publicly about their father's disappearance. Marcus located one of them, Ellen Hammond Reese, and sent her a carefully worded letter describing what he had heard. She responded 3 weeks later with a phone call that lasted 7 minutes. Ellen told Marcus that her father had called home the morning of his final flight, speaking with her mother about ordinary things: grocery shopping, a problem with the kitchen sink, plans for the weekend. He had ended the call by saying he would be home by 6 that evening. Ellen was 14 years old at the time. She remembered standing in the airport terminal, watching other flights arrive and depart, convinced that any moment her father would walk through the gate, smiling and apologizing for the delay. He never came. Ellen told Marcus that she appreciated him reaching out, but she could not bear to listen to the recordings. If her father was still out there somehow, still trying to come home after 50 years, she did not want to know. Some mysteries were too painful to solve. Marcus understood. He stopped his research and tried to return to normal life, but the night frequency continued to haunt him. He found himself volunteering for overnight shifts again, always listening for that voice, half hoping and half dreading that it might return. He was not the only one. Air traffic controllers from other facilities began reporting similar experiences, though these accounts were never officially documented. A controller in Miami claimed to receive transmissions from a flight that vanished in the Bermuda Triangle in 1965. A controller in Seattle reported contact with a military cargo plane lost over the Pacific in 1982. A controller in Denver heard voices speaking languages that had not been used in aviation for decades. The Federal Aviation Administration issued no official statements, but internal memos began circulating that Marcus obtained through contacts he had developed during the investigation. The memos instructed controllers to report any unusual transmissions immediately and to avoid engaging with them when possible. The language was carefully neutral, never acknowledging that something genuinely unexplained might be occurring. The memos described these incidents as radio anomalies and signal interference, bureaucratic terms that drained the phenomenon of its essential strangeness. But Marcus knew what he had heard. The Flight 749er had been real as the radar screens in front of him, as real as the fog rolling across the runways. Somewhere in the space between transmission and reception, between the moment a radio wave leaves its source and the moment it arrives at its destination, something had reached through and made contact. The passengers of Flight 749er were still out there, still flying, still trying to land at an airport that had changed beyond recognition since the day they departed Philadelphia. He began to consider the physics of it, though his understanding was limited. Radio waves travel at the speed of light, approximately 186,000 miles per second. A transmission sent from an aircraft 80 miles away should arrive in less than a millisecond. But what if something disrupted that journey? What if the signal became trapped somehow, looping through dimensions or time periods that normal physics could not account for? Marcus read scientific papers about electromagnetic anomalies, about theoretical wormholes, about the possibility that time itself might not flow in the linear fashion that humans experience. None of it provided answers, only more questions. 6 months after the initial transmission, Marcus was working another overnight shift when he heard something that made his blood freeze. It was not the emergency frequency this time, but the regular tower frequency used for all airport communications. The voice was faint, almost buried in static, but unmistakable. Boston Tower, Transcontinental 749er. We are still flying. We are still trying to land. Please respond. Marcus grabbed the transmit button. 749er, Boston Tower. I read you weak. Say your position. No response. He tried again. Nothing. The frequency returned to normal traffic. A United Airlines flight requesting taxi clearance. A JetBlue departure asking about weather conditions. Marcus did not report the second transmission. He could not face another investigation, another round of questions to which he had no answers. But he noted the date and time in his personal logbook, creating a record that only he would see. October 9th, the anniversary again. Flight 749er was reaching out once per year on the exact date of its disappearance, trying to complete a journey that should have lasted just over an hour but had somehow stretched across 5 decades. He started keeping a more detailed journal, documenting not just the transmissions he heard, but also the feeling that accompanied them. Each contact brought with it a sense of profound wrongness, a sensation that the normal boundaries of reality had temporarily dissolved. The air in the control tower would become heavier during these episodes, charged with static electricity that made his hair stand on end. The temperature would drop by several degrees. Other controllers reported experiencing severe headaches and nausea in the hours following these events, though medical examinations revealed nothing unusual. The phenomenon was spreading. By the 3rd year, controllers at 17 different facilities across North America had reported similar experiences. The Federal Aviation Administration quietly assembled a task force to investigate, though their findings were never made public. Marcus learned through confidential sources that the task force had concluded the transmissions were genuine but inexplicable, originating from locations that the investigators described as temporally displaced. The report recommended continued monitoring, but advised against any attempt to establish prolonged contact, citing concerns about unknown risks to both controllers and the entities transmitting. Marcus violated that recommendation on October 9th, 4 years after the initial contact. When the transmission came through at exactly 3:17 in the morning, he was ready. He had prepared a series of questions designed to extract maximum information. What do you see outside your windows? What do your instruments show? Are your passengers aware that time has passed? He transmitted the questions carefully, speaking slowly and clearly, but the response he received chilled him to his core. The voice of Flight 749er said, "Boston Tower, we see lights below us, cities that were not there before. The ocean has changed. The passengers know something is wrong, but they do not know what. We have been trying to land for so long now. We are tired. Please help us land." Marcus heard genuine desperation in those words, a plea from someone trapped in circumstances beyond human comprehension. He wanted to help. He wanted to guide them home. But how do you provide landing instructions to an aircraft that exists 50 years in the past, or in some parallel dimension adjacent to normal reality? He tried anyway. Marcus transmitted detailed approach instructions describing the current runway configuration, the instrument landing system frequencies, the weather conditions. He spoke for nearly 4 minutes, pouring every ounce of his professional knowledge into the transmission, trying to build a bridge of words that might somehow reach across the impossible distance. When he finished, silence. Then, after a full minute, the voice returned one final time. "Boston Tower, thank you. We see the runway now. We are going to try to land." The transmission ended.
Marcus stared at his radar screen. Nothing appeared. The runways remained empty. But something changed that night. Marcus felt it. A subtle shift in the atmosphere, a sense that some doorway had opened and then closed. He searched the airport perimeter at dawn, walking the entire length of runway 22 left, looking for any sign that an aircraft might have touched down. He found nothing except for a patch of tarmac near the approach end where the surface appeared scorched, though airport maintenance had no record of any incidents in that location. The scorched area measured exactly 42 feet by 31 feet, dimensions that matched the wheelbase and wingspan of a Douglas DC-6. Marcus submitted his report to David Chen's successor, a woman named Patricia Moore, who had been briefed on the Flight 749er situation but remained skeptical. She filed his report without comment, adding it to a growing archive of similar documents that would likely never be fully analyzed or understood. Marcus requested and received a transfer to day-shift operations shortly afterward. He could not continue working overnights, listening to that frequency, wondering if and when the voice might return. The transmissions from Flight 749er ceased after that night. October 9th came and went the following year with no contact. Controllers at Boston Logan and other facilities reported no further anomalies matching the pattern established by the Phantom flight. The Federal Aviation Administration quietly disbanded their task force, and the case files were archived with minimal classification, available to researchers who knew where to look, but obscure enough that few would bother searching. Marcus Webb retired from air traffic control in 2028 after 35 years of service. He moved to a small town in Vermont, far from any major airport, and tried to forget the voice that had haunted his nights. But on October 9th of each year, he finds himself awake at 3:17 in the morning, listening to the silence, wondering if somewhere in the darkness above, a Douglas DC-6 is still flying, still searching for a runway that exists just beyond reach, its passengers unaware that the world they knew has moved on without them. The official explanation for the Flight 749er transmissions remains unexplained radio phenomenon, a designation that satisfies no one but closes the case from an administrative perspective. The families of the original passengers have mostly passed away, their questions unanswered, their grief unresolved. A small memorial stands in Philadelphia International Airport, listing the names of the 42 passengers and 6 crew members lost on October 9, 1973. The memorial makes no mention of the transmissions received 50 years later, but air traffic controllers know. They pass the story among themselves during quiet shifts, a modern ghost tale for the aviation age. Some dismiss it as an elaborate hoax or mass delusion. Others believe every word. And a few, like Marcus Webb, carry the knowledge as a burden they can never fully set down. They have heard voices from the void, reaching across time and space, trying desperately to come home to a world that no longer exists in the form they remember. The phenomenon raises questions that aviation authorities refuse to address publicly. If Flight 749er could somehow transmit after 50 years, what happened to all the other aircraft that vanished without explanation? Are they still out there, trapped in whatever liminal space swallowed them? Do their passengers age? Do they understand what has happened to them? And most troubling, could this happen to any flight, at any time, without warning or explanation? Marcus occasionally receives calls from researchers and journalists who have discovered his connection to the case. He declines most interviews, but agreed to speak once, on condition of anonymity, to a documentary filmmaker investigating unexplained aviation phenomena. During that interview, Marcus said something that the filmmaker found so disturbing that the footage was never used. Marcus stated, "I think they landed. Not here, not in our world, but somewhere. Somewhere close enough that they could still reach us, still call for help. I think there are places where aircraft go that we cannot follow, places where the rules are different. Flight 749er found one of those places." The recording equipment in the control tower that night captured 17 hours of audio, though only the transmissions from Flight 749er have received significant attention. Audio engineers who analyzed the complete recording noted something strange in the background noise during the period when the Phantom flight was transmitting. Beneath the normal static and radio chatter, they detected what sounded like hundreds of voices, all speaking at once, creating a wall of sound that registered just below the threshold of normal hearing. Enhancement techniques revealed fragments of words in multiple languages, call signs from aircraft lost across decades, distress calls that were never received or answered. The engineers concluded that the emergency frequency might contain an archive of every lost flight, their final transmissions somehow preserved in the electromagnetic spectrum, waiting for the right conditions to briefly emerge and be heard. This discovery was never officially confirmed or publicized. The Federal Aviation Administration seized the enhanced recordings and classified them under regulations that prevented any further civilian research.
But the implication remains. Every time an aircraft disappears, it might leave behind a ghost in the radio waves, an echo that could potentially be contacted under circumstances that remain beyond our current understanding. Flight 749 was simply the first to break through strongly enough to be clearly heard and documented. What you have just heard is not fiction. The documentation exists, archived in facilities that most people will never access, protected by classification systems that ensure the truth remains obscured. Marcus Webb is a real person, though that is not his actual name. He agreed to share his experience on condition that his identity be protected. The transcripts of the transmissions exist. The audio recordings exist. The physical evidence, including the scorched runway section, was documented before being resurfaced during routine maintenance operations that conveniently destroyed any anomalous characteristics the tarmac might have possessed. The next time you board an aircraft, consider the possibility that the journey you are about to take might not follow the path you expect. Consider that somewhere between departure and arrival, in the invisible spaces that modern technology cannot fully map or understand, there might exist doorways to places where aircraft go but do not return. Consider that the voices of lost passengers might still be calling out, trying to reach controllers who cannot guide them home because home no longer exists in the form they remember. Flight 749er tried to land for 50 years before finally succeeding in a reality adjacent to but separate from ours. What would you do if you were a passenger on that flight, aware that something had gone wrong but unable to comprehend the magnitude of the disaster? Would you maintain hope that eventually you would land, that someone would guide you home? Or would you accept that some journeys have no destination, that some flights are condemned to circle forever in the dark spaces between worlds, their passengers trapped in an eternal approach that never resolves into landing gear touching solid ground? The truth about Flight 749er remains classified at the highest levels. Multiple government agencies continue to investigate similar phenomena, though their findings are never released to the public. Air traffic controllers worldwide have been instructed to report but not engage with anomalous transmissions, suggesting that the authorities recognize the reality of these events but fear the implications of acknowledging them openly. The general public remains unaware that commercial aviation contains mysteries that rival anything found in science fiction or horror novels. Do you think this was just radio interference bouncing off the atmosphere? Do you think Marcus Webb and his colleagues hallucinated the entire event? Or do you accept the possibility that reality contains gaps, holes, spaces where the normal rules collapse and allow the impossible to manifest? What you believe matters less than what you do with that belief. If this story disturbs you, if it makes you question the nature of the world you inhabit, then it has succeeded in its purpose. Truth is often more disturbing than fiction, because truth does not resolve neatly, does not provide satisfying explanations, and does not care whether you accept it or not. Flight 749er departed Philadelphia on October 9, 1973. 50 years later, it tried to land in Boston. Where it spent those 50 years, what its passengers experienced, and whether they ultimately found peace or remained trapped in their eternal approach are questions that may never be answered. But every October 9th, at exactly 3:17 in the morning, Air traffic controllers at Boston Logan International Airport listen carefully to the emergency frequency, wondering if this will be the year the voice returns, requesting permission to land one more time. Share your opinion in the comments. What would you do if you were Marcus Webb, hearing that impossible transmission? Do you think Flight 749er is still out there somewhere, still trying to come home? Subscribe now for more investigations into aviation mysteries that the authorities do not want you to know about. The stories that official reports classify or dismiss. The truth that exists in the spaces between what we can explain and what we fear to acknowledge.